Today we'll be going over the rotation for the Barbara Taser team comp. This is a Taser variation that outputs slightly less damage, but offers more healing, which makes it easier to play in my opinion. If you have Kokomi, you can replace Barbara with her for a stronger and even safer version of this team comp. First, let's just see what the rotation looks like. As a disclaimer, I'm not claiming that this is the best or optimal rotation. This is just a rotation that happens to work well for me with this team. Just before Fischl comes back onto the field is the end of the rotation, so what you just saw is one full cycle. Now let's take a closer look at the rotation and go over which skills are being used and why they're being used in that order. I open with Barbara's skill to get an initial Hydro Aura on the enemies, and it also gives me some healing throughout the rotation. I use Sacrificial Fragments on Barbara to help out with the high cooldown of this skill. You can also use 4 pieces of the Thundering Fury set to achieve a similar effect. Next, I use Fischl's skill to summon Oz onto the field. Oz becomes a regular source of Electro particles, which is important for keeping Beidou's energy up. He also applies an Electro Aura on the enemies, which sets me up for an Electro Swirl with Sucrose. The cooldown on Fischl's skill is longer than the length of this rotation, so I alternate between her skill and her burst every other rotation. Next, I use Sucrose's skill, followed by her burst if it's available. This triggers an Electro Swirl reaction, which decreases the enemy's Electro Res because I'm using 4 pieces of the Viridescent Veneer set on Sucrose. Sucrose's skill itself also buffs the team's EM thanks to her A1 and A4 passives. Now it's time to bring out Beidou, who is the main source of damage for this team. Because she came onto the field right after Sucrose, she gets a nice attack percent buff from Sucrose's Thrilling Tails. Her burst is able to snapshot this buff, which is part of the reason why Beidou's burst is so powerful. I use her skill before her burst so that the electro particles generated by the skill will be automatically caught by her during her burst animation. Next, I use Barbara's normal attacks to apply Hydro on the enemy, which triggers electro charge reactions. Her normal attacks also keep the team healthy as long as her skill is active. Then I swap to Sucrose and use a string of her normal attacks. Viridescent Veneer's effect does not trigger from off-field, which is why I bring out Sucrose one more time to refresh that res debuff. I follow that up with one more use of Beidou's skill to generate more electro energy. If you skip this step, Beidou will likely not have enough energy to use her burst in the next rotation, so it's really important to bring her out and use her skill one more time in the middle of the rotation. Also make sure she stays on the field long enough to catch these electro particles. Finally, I end the rotation with 2 full strings of Barbara's normal attacks. As I mentioned earlier, I alternate to Fischl's burst on the second rotation since her skill is still on cooldown. Sucrose skill, Beidou's skill, Beidou's burst, Barbara's normals, swap to Sucrose normals, I use her burst in this since it came back up, Beidou's skill, catch the electro particles, back to Barbara's normals, and one more string of Barbara's normals. I restart the rotation with Fischl's skill, Sucrose skill, Beidou's skill, Beidou burst, and back to Barbara normals. Here I'm supposed to switch back to Sucrose, but I decide to finish them off with Barbara since their shields are so low. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I've also made an infographic to act as a visual version of this guide. The link to that infographic is in the video description, so feel free to use that as a kind of cheat sheet to help you practice the rotation.